All right, so picking up with slide number 21 on my PowerPoint, this is part 2 of Plato's Euthyphro dialogue. Okay, so we explained what divine command theory is. It's the theory that what makes something right or moral or just or good or pious or holy is it's being approved of, loved, commanded by, prescribed, or somehow or another responded to with a positive attitude by divinity, whether singular, one God, or all gods agreeing. All right, and Socrates critiqued that by asking, is it that way or is it the other way around? Do the gods naturally form positive attitudes towards things that are just and good and pious because they're just and good and pious? Or do they only become just and good and pious because the gods happen to like them for no reason whatsoever except arbitrarily, which makes no sense. So, but assuming that there is something in the zone of correct about divine command theory, simply by the fact that almost all religions adhere to some kind of version of a religious theory of ethics according to which God, being the source of all goodness, determines what things are good. Right? We're going to just look at some problems, right? That's the name of this slide. Problems with DCT, divine command theory. So the first is this main idea, which is Socrates, but it could be put another way and teased out in two particularly different ways. Right, so either God has a reason for what he likes, or he doesn't. Right? This is one of these either-or dilemmas. Right? So if God has no reason for why, let's say there's a category of all the things that he loves on this side and all of the things that he hates on this side, or whatever, right? He has a list of things that he likes and dislikes and things that are neutral in the middle, right? If he has no reason why he likes the things that he likes and dislikes the things that he dislikes, or is neutral about the things in the middle that he's neutral about, then he could have been completely arbitrary in assigning things to the different categories. It's like, just like colors. Oh, I like green, I don't like blue, and yellow I neither like nor dislike. I don't have any particular reason. That's just my feeling about those things, right? So if that was the case, if there was nothing likable or unlikable, or the absence of both in the things themselves that God or the gods like or dislike, then God could have chosen to like or dislike things radically differently, right? For example, what we say is that God could have, if he had no real reasons for why he likes, let's just say, generosity, then he could have just liked torture instead. I like torture. It kind of makes me laugh, seeing other people suffer. Like if there's no reason about, generosity or charity being good in and of itself, and torture being bad in and of itself, God could have just flipped them and like, I hate charity. It's lame. It nauseates me, and I like torture is fun. I like watching people squirm. I mean, God could have been completely arbitrary, just a kind of arbitrary. He's a cosmic power. It's all up to him. He has infinite power. He can do whatever the heck he wants. He's God, right? But then things wouldn't make sense. Like God could have then decreed, for example, according to my decree, you should torture every third innocent child that you meet on Wednesdays. Right? And then the most holy man and holy woman, the most pious, religious, devout person in the universe would be someone who always does that. Right? That would make sense if there was no basis for God's liking what he likes and disliking what he doesn't like. Right? What's to stop him? Right? So that's problematic in and of itself because it doesn't make sense. We do think that things really are wrong or right, that some things really are moral and some things really are immoral, right? But similarly, that's the first problem. The second problem is the doctrine of God's goodness, which is a theological or religious theory to the effect that says God is good, God is inherently good, or God is love, or something like that, right? But like the doctrine that God is omnibenevolent, all loving or all good, God is the source of all goodness. There's nothing that's more good or better than God, so to speak, more good, right? That would become actually meaningless, according to the divine command theory, because remember what it says. X is good if X is approved by God, right? So then the statement God is good would mean God is approved by God. God approves of himself. Whoop-de-doo. Satan also approves of himself. Most people approve of themselves. It would become circular and meaningless, right? The doctrine just wouldn't make sense. It would be circular, right? God is good means God is approved of by God. But then what's the goodness in that, right? Like I said, he could approve of himself regardless of what horrible commands he gave everyone else, right? So, but the idea that there's something genuine or meaningful, that there's real substance to the claim that God's nature is a certain way, it's a good nature, would lose meaning if anything could be God's nature. He could want whatever he wants, but as long as he approves of himself, it would be good. Now that doesn't make sense. That kind of contradicts the idea that there's some meaning to the idea that the greatest being in the universe, or the creator, right, is good by nature. Okay? All right, so that's the first one, right? Remember, there's a dilemma here, either or. Either God has no reasons whatsoever for what he loves, which we just looked at, and that doesn't work, or he does have reasons for what he loves. All right, so if the things he loves, things he doesn't love, there's the list of them, and then the things in the middle. If there's something about all the things that God loves that's the reasons why, or the reason why he loves them, right? Then those reasons are independent of God in a way, right? They're all lovable because they're good. Maybe because they increase happiness, they reduce suffering, they don't injure anyone's rights, right? And the things that he dislikes cause needless suffering, destroy people's happiness, trample over their rights and stuff like that, right? So he loves these things because they're good, and he doesn't like these because they're not good, right? So there's something that makes them good or not good. That's independent of God's will, right? God has the reasons why he likes them, but those reasons are about the things. They're not about God's attitude. God has the attitude of liking those things because they have the characteristics of being good and not being good. That's why he likes what's good and doesn't like what's not good, right? So then the right kinds of reasons for performing an action are the things that make the action right or good, not God's liking them because they're right. All right, so that's big difference there. Give me a moment here. I lost my connection with my screen. All right, so biblical problems with the divine command theory. All right, the divine command theory is supposed to capture the biblical understanding of morals, but think about Adam again, right? One way in which the divine command theory is often espoused or explained is that human beings only find out what's right and wrong when God tells us. If it's all entirely up to God's attitudes about things, right? Not things that we can discern in the things themselves, right? But if God commands us, do this, then that means this is good. If God forbids us from doing that, that means that is bad. And we only find that out when God tells us, right? If it's up to him and his attitudes, we have to know what his attitudes are. The only way we could find out is if he tells us, right? So then, if divine command theory, if that theory that I just explained, that it depends on God's declaring his attitudes, if that's correct, then when God said, don't eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the Adam case, right? Eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil would give you the knowledge of right and wrong, right? Then having the knowledge between what's good and evil would be bad because God says not to have it, right? But if you don't understand the knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, how could it be wrong, right? So that's the problem. We already dealt with that in our reading from Richard LaCroix. Croix, for those of you who are just checking in now. All right, next biblical case, Cain and Abel. God punishes Cain for killing his brother Abel. Right, and Cain says the punishment is unbearable. It's too much to bear. Right, so it's a significant punishment, being banished and everything. But God had not forbidden murder yet. So that story is morally inconsistent with divine command theory, which says that we only find out what's right and wrong when God tells us. Okay, third biblical case is Abraham being willing to sacrifice his son. God commands him to do it. You could say, oh yeah, it was just a test, but still, if God said you should sacrifice your son, then killing an innocent person to appease the greatest power in the universe suggests that that's a good thing. But on my chart in the previous lecture, where I have obviously bad things and obviously good things, killing an innocent person to appease someone is obviously morally wrong. And yet God commands it, which would make it morally right. That's problematic. Okay? If you say, oh, it was a test, well, God already knew the result of the test, right? Because he knows everything. And that kind of commandment sends a bad message to mankind, and then almost anything is justified in the name of religion because God said so, or our God said so. Right? If we're going to praise Abraham for that, then that opens up a big can of worms when anybody ever does anything in the name of their religion, and we've seen problems with that theory. All right? Another problem with it, though, is that like Abraham is treated as one of the greatest prophets, not only in Judaism and in Christianity, but in Islam, because he was willing to surrender his will to God and even sacrifice his own son, who him and Sarah took like over 90 years or 100 years just to have a kid, right? He's innocent. He's willing to do that, which shows his total faith and trust in God, and even surrendering his moral compass to God, not questioning God, and just being willing to obey God, even though God called it off, right? So it was only a test. In the very same book, later on, Abraham argues with God when Abraham finds out that God is planning on destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And Abraham says, wait a second. He reasons and like haggles with God, saying, look, it would be wrong of you to destroy a whole city if I could find 50 good men in that city. So he's now telling God that God would be wrong. This is the opposite of what was praised in his act of great submission and surrender, right? And then he keeps haggling with God. He gets it down to 10 men, right? Which he's repeatedly telling God, you would be wrong if it was 40. You'd be wrong if it was 30. You'd be wrong if it was 20. You'd be wrong, whatever the numbers are. I forget the exact breakdown, but he winds up with 10. And the point is simply, he's got moral knowledge that doesn't come from God, and he's telling God it would be wrong of you. That's inconsistent with divine command theory, right? Of course, he didn't find 10, and God destroyed the place. All right, next slide. Cases where divine command theory might actually make sense. And remember, Socrates does think that Euthyphro might be onto something, and he's the midwife of ideas trying to help Euthyphro give birth. He could have gone a step further. Now, this is me speaking, right? Think of the Sabbath, right? It concerns man's relationship to God, not man's relationship to man, right? God as parent can say, you know what? Remember in the middle neutral chart, it said working. Working at a certain day of the week is morally irrelevant and neutral, but not after God asks you not to work on that day. If God is our loving parent and creator, and God says, I want you to set aside this day every week to be in relationship with me. This is like a parent asking a child to do something that might have otherwise been morally neutral, but once the parent says, I don't want you to do that, or I want you to do that, then it takes on a moral value. Because the parent does have some authority over the child, right? The parent can take a morally neutral thing and make it morally positive or negative by saying you should do it or you shouldn't do it, right? So working at a certain time, the Sabbath, is in and of itself morally irrelevant and neutral, but when God says that's our time, then that puts a value on it that it didn't have. I don't think God can convert something like killing an innocent person and turn it into a good thing just because God said you should do it, right? But I think God can take a morally neutral thing like saying observe the Sabbath, or turning ordinary water into holy water, or something like that, right? But I don't think God can transform evil actions in that way. It doesn't make sense. All right, next slide. So this is a review. We covered this in class, actually, for those of you who took the class, where we transition to the fourth answer to the question, what is piety? Which is actually Euthyphro's third definition. Fourth answer, third definition. Where Socrates tries to help him, being the midwife again and being charitable, saying, okay, Euthyphro, let's try something else. What's the bigger category, piety or justice? Euthyphro says, what? And he says, well, what about comparison? What's the greater thing, odd numbers or numbers? And Euthyphro's like, oh yeah, numbers. And he gives a couple of other examples. And RR on the slide is me, Rick Rapetti. I say, just compare, which is the bigger category, mammals or animals? Well, surely animals is, because all mammals are animals, but not all animals are mammals. Reptiles are not mammals, but they're animals, so the larger category is animal. Similarly, what's the bigger category, siblings or relatives? Well, relatives are, because not all relatives are siblings, but all siblings are relatives. Aunts and uncles are relatives, parents and children are relatives, grandparents and so on, cousins, they're all relatives, right? So relatives is the larger category. So Euthyphro gets it, he goes, oh, okay, justice is the larger category, all right? So the larger category is called the genus, just so you know. Aristotle invented the definition of definition by saying if you give the genus, which is the category, the closest conceptual category to which a thing belongs, right? And then you give the species, which is how does that thing differ from other things in that category, then you've defined it, right? So when Socrates gets him to say justice is the larger category, that's the genus. And then he wants to know, among justice relationships, in the category of justice, what kind of thing is piety as opposed to other kinds of justice? And Euthyphro gives the answer, which is the species. There's the genus, the larger category, and then how things differentiate from each other within that category is the species. The species is that part about man's relationship to gods, like on the Sabbath, right? That's a man-God justice relationship kind of thing. God asks us to obey the Sabbath, we obey it, right? That's different from me stealing your cat or your cow or your car, which is a man-to-man justice relationship where I violated your rights or something like that, right? So the man-God relationship is how human beings relate to God. So there's something right about that when it comes to piety, right? But the analogy I like to use for Aristotle's definition of definition is to ask you, what's a brother? What's the smallest conceptual category that includes brothers, right, and other things like it, right? Like if you said if that includes brothers and cousins, then it would be relatives. But if you said that includes only brothers and sisters, the smallest category would be sibling. Then that's the genus for brother, sibling, the smallest category that includes it, right? And then the next question is, how do brothers differ from other siblings that are not brothers, namely sisters, right? Maleness, or being male, right? So there's the species. Male is what's distinctive about brother siblings. So the definition of a brother is a male sibling. There's your Aristotle-style genus and species definition. So similarly, piety is a justice relationship. What kind? A man-God justice relationship. So let's go to the next slide where we'll see that. Justice relationships. We've got man-man. That's how I treat you. We've got God to man. That's how God treats us. When we are good or bad, God rewards or punishes us. We've got man to God. That's how human beings treat God. We're either respectful, devout, religious, observant, or we're not, maybe even disrespectful, like when Achilles cuts the head off of the statue of the god Apollo, right? And then there's God. Well, if there's only one God, it's how God treats himself. That doesn't really, it's not really an issue. But if in the Greek case, where there's more than one God, and the gods punish each other when they do wrong, that's a God-God justice relationship. Right? So this is a map. And you've got man-man, God-man, man-God, that's the piety one, and then God-God. right? Like Zeus punishing his father Kronos. So piety is a man-God-justice relationship. That tells you the genus, right? It's a justice relationship, smaller category, a man-God-justice relationship. And out of man-God-justice relationships, which one is it? It's the one in which men are respectful to, devout, observant, etc. They have the right attitudes towards the gods, or we serve the gods, or the way that Euthyphro puts it is when man tends to the gods, like a priest in the temple who tends to all the things about the gods and their statues and the prayers and the rituals and offerings and sacrifices and all of that stuff. Okay, next slide. So that's Euthyphro's fourth attempt, right? A man-God-justice relationship in which man tends to the gods. This is a perfect Aristotelian genus-species type definition. As with the Sabbath, it concerns man's relationship to God, right? The things that a priest does or a temple servant, right? Making sacrifices, offerings, performing prayers and rituals, attending to the temple, the statues. And Euthyphro says it's those kinds of things that a priest does, and we get all good things back from the gods. That's the God-man relationship, right? So when humans are good to the gods reward us, and when we're bad to the gods punish us. They reward us with victory in war, good harvest, good afterlife, all that kind of stuff. And this is a pretty universal idea. So Euthyphro does have some knowledge. That kind of idea is in almost every religion. Okay, next slide, Socrates' reply. So it's a sort of trade then between men and gods, and Euthyphro says, sort of. And then Socrates asks, well, do the gods benefit from this? And Euthyphro's like, by Zeus, no, right? Which implies like we can't benefit the gods. Either they're so much greater than us or they're almost perfect or whatever, right? They don't need anything from us, right? So then Zeus says, well, what are they, poor tradesmen then? If they always get the bad end of the stick, that we get everything from them and they get nothing from us? And Euthyphro says, no. And then Socrates asks, well, then why do they want us to bother being good toward them or pious, right? What's in it for them? Like, what's the point? And Euthyphro's answer is because it pleases them. And Socrates is like, oh no, here we go again. Piety is what pleases the gods. Wasn't that the first definition? We're back to square one. Euthyphro, come on, stop. You're cheating. You're holding out on me. Are you ever going to teach me what piety is? I have a court case in there. I need to know. They're going to kill me. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they blame each other, right? Euthyphro says, it's all your questioning. And Socrates is like, no, it's your answers. And they blame each other. And, Euthyphro gets frustrated. He says, look, Socrates, I have to go. And this kind of implies, that once again, philosophical dialogues often uncover things. They make some things clear, but they ultimately leave us still questioning or without satisfactory, complete, and total and final answers. That's one of the morals of the story. But on the next slide, it says, RR analysis, that's me. Euthyphro was right, Socrates was wrong. Right? I think Socrates actually loses his footing, because when Euthyphro says, because it pleases the gods, he's not offering a definition there. He's not answering the question, what is piety? Right? He's answering the question, why do the gods want us to be pious? Right? It's a why question. Right? And so he says, well, because it pleases them. Right? But even that, he gets that a little backwards. But what I would say is he could have, if I was his lawyer, I would defend him and I would say something like this. Consider what my son did to me once. I don't know if it was Father's Day or my birthday or Christmas. He was about 4 or 5. And he used to see me playing with my playing cards, poker and whatever with my friends. And I had a favorite deck of cards. And he actually wrapped up my cards in gift wrap and gave them to me for the occasion. And I thought that was very sweet. It pleased me, but it didn't benefit me because they were already my cards, right? So like we can't give anything to the gods or even to our parents if they have everything already, right? But the gesture alone would please them, right? But the reason why it would please, well, the next question Socrates should have asked was, well, then why does it please the gods? Remember, that's not enough. What is it about it that's pleasing to the gods? And then Euthyphro, or me as Euthyphro's lawyer, would say, well, it pleases the gods the same way it pleases a parent. When a child is trying to do the right thing and learning something and approximating some value or goal or principle, the mere gesture alone pleases the parent. Why does it please the parent? Because the parent cares about the child. Right? I was happy to see my son making attempts at understanding the concept of gift giving. And I think there are two aspects to gift giving, and he got the better part right, which is try to give people things that they like. Right? A lot of us get gifts and we're like, oh, thank you. What am I going to do with this? Right? So he at least got that, the more important part that most adults don't even get right. Give people something that they like. Well, the part that he got wrong is that they don't already have, or that they don't already own, that's not theirs, right? But the mere fact that he was trying to get that right pleased me, not for my own sake, but for his sake, because I care about him. I was happy and pleased to see him making that kind of effort and progress, right? Okay, so Euthyphro wasn't defining piety again, back to square one. Oh, what piety is what pleases the gods. No, he was answering a different question. Why do the gods want us to be pious? Because it pleases them. Well, why does it? Socrates should have just said, well, why does it please them? And then he could have said, because they care about us. And when they see us making efforts to be on good terms with them, they want us to be happy, and they know that we'll do better if we try to do things like that, because that means we're morally upright and we're trying to do the right thing. And because the gods care about us, they want to see us doing the right thing. And when they see us doing the right thing, that pleases them. Perfect explanation. But better still is the final definition. Piety is a man-God-justice relationship. That works for the Sabbath and all those other kinds of things. It's a perfectly valid Aristotelian definition. Right? And it captures our pre-philosophical idea, right? When we say, what's a pious Hindu or a pious Muslim? Somebody who relates to God in the way that their religion suggests that they should, right? The pious Muslim prays 5 times a day facing Mecca, and so on, right? No matter what the religion is. Okay, so next slide. That's where I just said, they joke around about whose fault it is. We did that already, so next slide, morals of the story. Genuine philosophical inquiry is inconclusive, which I already said. All knowledge is fraught with deep philosophical confusion, right? Even Socrates seems to have missed a beat. The more we learn about a concept, apparently, the more we uncover problems with it, and then the less that we know. Socratic Method, the method of cross-examination, or heightened examination of everything. The Greek word for this method is elanchus, cross-examination. Somebody says something that sparks a question. A proposal is made to answer the question. Then there's critical analysis of the proposal. And then there's a decision that's made. You either accept it, that it made sense, you revise it and continue with the process. You repeat the process, or you just reject the answer and accept that we don't know. Right? And then the other two major ideas that I think come out of this is seeing Socrates not only engage in Socratic method, but the principle of charitable interpretation, trying to help Euthyphro give birth to his ideas, trying to help Euthyphro formulate a better version of the argument, as opposed to straw man, which is the opposite of that, when you mischaracterize an argument. I think that Socrates, in the last stage of this dialogue, unintentionally committed a straw man when he said, oh, we're back to square one, because I don't think we were. I think Euthyphro was exactly right. And I think Socrates could have used Euthyphro's definition to defend himself at his own trial, because he could have said, as a philosopher, my God is the god Apollo, the god of wisdom. And he could have talked about how the god of wisdom said that no man is wiser than Socrates. That's why Socrates went around trying to awaken wisdom in human beings, because he figured out that wisdom is awareness or knowledge of your own ignorance. And by questioning everybody, he was planting a seed of wisdom so that when Euthyphro got that seed in him, Euthyphro realized, I don't really understand what piety is. Now maybe I can learn. Right? So if Apollo is the god of wisdom, and wisdom is awareness of your ignorance, and Socrates was going around zapping people to make them aware that they don't really know what they think they know, then he was planting the seed of wisdom in human beings. That was his job. That job was put on him by the god Apollo, and so If piety is a man-God-justice relationship in which human beings give to the gods what the gods want of them, right, or treat them with respect and reverence by following their requests, then Socrates was obeying and being pious to the god of wisdom, the god of the philosophers, Apollo, right? He could have said that. He came close to saying it, but he couldn't use Euthyphro's definition because he missed it, which is tragic and ironic. So, like the last sentence in my PowerPoint slide says, don't get so hooked on elanchus, which is the Greek word for this cross-examination, the Socratic Method, that you overlook your own mistakes, right? Socrates just habitually thought, there's got to be something wrong with that. What's wrong with that? Just keep going. Missed out on a good definition, all right? So, sorry I rushed through that because I have a meeting coming up in a few minutes and I have to go. All right, it's been fun. See you next time.